In this lesson, we'll take a look at the Softimage Render Manager, which is a very, very important area that you'll need to familiarize yourself with whenever rendering out your final images. Okay, so when it comes time to outputting our final animation rendering, this is something where we have to really make a lot of decisions as far as which camera is going to be rendered out, how many frames of our timeline are going to be rendered out, what is the resolution as far as the overall image dimensions that we want to render out, what type of a format or image format do we want to render out. All of these things are very, very important to consider, and these are all things that are controlled through the Softimage Render Manager. So the Render Manager can be accessed through the Render menu. So we'll go to Render, once again down to Render, and all the way at the bottom we have the Render Manager. Okay, so in this area, this is where we have sort of a combination of a lot of these different areas that we've had a chance to look at just very briefly through some of our previous lessons. So starting over here, we have our output, which you can see our output, our pass shaders. This is the exact same area that we had access to in our previous lesson whenever we went to edit current pass. You can see exact same window, just located in a slightly different area. We also have a lot of these render settings in here, so where we can start to enable final gather, global illumination. Again, this area is the exact same area that we looked at in our previous lesson with our render region whenever we accessed our final gathering. So within this area, this is again something very, very important that we need to come in here and always access for our final renders. Now, to get an idea of what your final render is going to look like, we can use this preview option. So if we come in and click preview, this is what we're going to get through our final render. Now you can see there's a few issues here. So number one, this is actually not rendering from the correct camera. So what we need to do is make sure that we come in and address that. So through our render manager, right now the pass camera is just set to camera, which means it's actually going to render from this guy right here. You can start to see just what we have. So this is the point of view that's being rendered from. Let's instead make sure that we set this to the shot camera. Now, once again, if I go to preview, let this render through. Okay, now you can see that that is more like what we would expect. Now, here's another issue that you may have noticed. You can see that this render looks very, very dark compared to our render region. So if I were to switch back to my camera and render this out, you can see that within our render region, this looks really nice and bright, very well lit. But again, from the preview, we see something completely different. Now, the reason for this is that there are actually two completely separate groupings of render settings inside of Softimage. Now, we have one set of rendering options that are controlling the render region. We have a completely separate set of render options that control our final output. So for example, if I go into my render region options, so I'll just once again go into all options. If we go into final gathering, you can see we do have final gathering enabled. However, if I go back to my render manager and look for final gathering, you can see for my render manager, final gathering is not enabled, which is why we get our really, really dark renders. So very, very, very important thing to keep in mind that any changes and special options that we set for our render region options will not be transferred to our final output options. So it takes a little bit of getting used to, but fortunately Softimage has a really, really nifty function built in where we can take all of our special settings from our render region and then instantly populate those into our render manager. So to do this, we go to region copy, and what we're going to do is copy our active viewport to the global renderer. So essentially what that means is we're going to take all of the rendering options and all the special render settings that we have set up here, and we're going to simply populate those into our global render. Okay, now really doesn't look like anything has happened, but what we should see now is the next time we do our preview, we see exactly the same thing that we had in our render region. So all of our render settings have been populated and carried over, and now, again, this is exactly what we will get for our final rendered output. Now, let's talk about the resolution of our image. So if I go, again, back to my render manager, we can control this through our scene Render Options. So over here, click on Scene Render Options. Over here we have our scene output resolution, which in my case I have this set to 1280 by 720, but we can set this to whatever we want. So to change this, we're going to go to Output Formats, and in this new window that pops up, this is where we can start to set things like our output format, our picture standard, things like that. Now, something that's really important to keep in mind is that we can actually set two different options. So if I wanted to set, let's say, a 720 by 480 up here, you can see as soon as I set this to my output format preset, it instantly populates that down here to my camera. So now if I hit Apply Now and hit OK, give this just a moment, it should now go in and reset this. So now I'm going to output a 720 by 480 image. And we can test that. Let me just close out my render region back here. If I go to Preview, you can see now it's going to render out 720 by 480. And again, this is the same resolution that we're going to get now whenever we do our final render. Okay, now again, something really important that I want to point out is if you look very closely, you might notice that my image now actually looks a little bit squished. It looks a little bit longer, and it's a very subtle difference, but it is definitely there. So something that you really want to be very conscious of is this pixel ratio. With this preset that I'm using right now, this is set to 0.9, which is actually giving me slightly squished pixels. Now this is going to be good if I were going to a CRT monitor or old tube television. But for something like a computer monitor or the web that displays square pixels, we can get this look that looks, again, just sort of squished. So anytime you're going to be rendering out in something that's going to be viewed on the web or viewed on a computer monitor, you always want to make sure that your pixel ratio is set to 1. So to fix that, I'll just go back to my output format. Now, very important whenever we make any kind of custom adjustments to these camera settings, let's always make sure that we come in and set this top preset to custom. All right, and now with that set to custom, we can come in and set this pixel ratio to something like 1, which will automatically adjust our resolution. But now we hit Apply Now, hit OK. It'll go through and change it everywhere it needs to be changed. Hit Preview. There we go. And now you can see my image doesn't look nearly as squished as it did before. So again, very important thing to come in here and make sure that we have our resolution set properly. Now, once we have our resolution set, the other option that we need to change is our start and end frames. By default, Softimage will set you to frame 1 through 100. Now, in my case, I have a 200 frame timeline. So I want to make sure that my frame end is set to 200. Press OK, or just press Enter, and now that should be set for us. Right above this, we can see where our images or our renders will be output to. So Softimage is going to put this inside of our render pictures directory. All right, and then once we have that set, there is one last very important thing that we need to do, and that is to set our render output. So as far as the format, right now it's going to set this as a .pic file. So if I select this and go to Edit, what we're going to do is wind up with a single individual image for every single frame in our animation. So for a 200 frame sequence, we're actually going to wind up with 200 individual pictures that will make up this whole sequence. This is actually something that is really good. Your first thought may be that you want to output this as an AVI or a QuickTime movie. You'll notice looking at this that Softimage does not even give us that option. We only have the option of outputting in image sequences, which again is really nice, because if we have, let's say, a 200 frame sequence and we render through and at frame 170 our render crashes, well, what will happen is that we still have 170 individual images that have been written out. So we still have all of our information up to that point. So at that point, we just open up Softimage, tell the render to start from frame 170 to 200, continue our render, and we don't lose any information. Whereas if we tried to render this out as an AVI, we would have to start our render all over again, all from scratch. So while it may appear at first that this is more of a hindrance, this is actually a great feature to have. Now, as far as the actual format that you want to use, that's something that's entirely up to you. Typically, I like to use a Targa file. This provides a really nice mixture of high quality image, relatively manageable file size. We also have the ability to have an alpha channel in this if we need to, so this does a really nice job for most situations, I find. All right, and then also back in this same area, we could actually change our image name or our sequence name. So if I wanted to call this something like Softimage ship render, there we are. And with that set, now we should have a file sequence. It's called Softimage ship render dot frame number dot TGA. Actually, we need to do make sure that we do have our frame in here. So Softimage ship render, and then we'll do open bracket frame, and then close bracket. We'll also probably go in here and make sure that we add a period, so that way it will be Softimage ship render dot frame number dot TGA. Okay, so as you can see, quite a few things that we do need to keep in mind whenever outputting our final renders. We need to make sure that we always come in and copy any special options to our render manager, just like what we saw. Once we have our render manager open, we need to make sure that we set the proper camera. We need to make sure that we set the proper output file and name. We also need to make sure that we come in and set the proper resolution, and then finally the proper start and end frame. And again, all of these are found inside of the scene render options category, or this column here. Right now in my case, I will make sure that I have my format set properly. So I do want to output this as a HD 720, so 1280 by 720. Again, I leave my preset set to custom, so that way I can make sure that whatever settings I have in here will be absolute. We don't have any risk of interference between these two different settings. Once I have that, once again, apply now, press OK, let it go through and make all those changes everywhere it needs to be changed. And now, when I'm ready to output my final rendered sequence, just simply go up to Render, and now Render Current Pass. So you can see now it's going to go through here and render out my entire sequence from start to finish. Okay, so once you have your sequence, your render completed, again, if you take a look inside your render pictures directory of your Softimage project, you can see here's our individual renders, and again, we'll have one picture for every single frame in our animation. So if we double click on any of these, you can see here's one of our individual frames. So once you have these rendered out, there's the question of, well, what do you start to do with these, or how can you start to bring these together into some kind of a final sequence? Well, for this, you'd need to take your image sequence and then bring that into another application. So if you wanted to render these out as a QuickTime or an AVI, you could just simply take your Targa sequence and then import that into something like After Effects. Or if you have Autodesk Composite installed, which Autodesk Composite does come with Softimage, and we do have some training on how to use Autodesk Composite. So this is one option that you have for taking your final rendered sequence and then spitting that out as a movie. If you want a free solution, you also have the option to use something like Virtual Dub, which will, again, let you bring your sequence in and then output that as a QuickTime or an AVI. Okay, so this has been a pretty in-depth look at how we need to go through the process of taking our animations and our final scenes from Softimage and then rendering those out in a usable format. So this will now bring us to the conclusion of this Introduction to Softimage training, where we've really had a chance to build a strong foundation and get a good overview of Softimage's toolset and its capabilities. So now that you've had a chance to really just see what this whole start-to-finish process looks like, I would really recommend for you to go back and do your own little short sequence, maybe with your own ship design, your own animation sequence. Really just have fun with it. Use it as a growing and learning opportunity for yourself. And also, feel free to post your images and animations onto our forums. We'd love to see how you're able to take some of these core techniques that we've taught you and how you can really adapt these and make them into your own. Now from here, we do have lots of additional tutorials for you to view depending on which areas of the program you'd like to learn more about. So if you'd like to take a more in-depth look at Softimage's modeling tools, a great place to start would be our tutorial called Introduction to Modeling in Softimage. To learn more about the UV and texturing process, we have our UV layout in Softimage tutorial. If If you'd like to learn more about rigging and animation, again, two great places to start would be Introduction to Character Rigging in Softimage, as well as Introduction to Animation in Softimage. If you'd like to take a deeper look at some of the ice dynamics and some of the really powerful possibilities that we have with this, I would recommend our beginning tutorial called Getting Started with Ice in Softimage. And then finally, if you'd like to learn more about lighting and rendering and some of the topics that we've touched on during this training, then we have a much more in-depth set of training for you to go through. These are Introduction to Lighting in Softimage, as well as our Introduction to Mental Ray in Softimage tutorials. And really this represents just a very small fraction of the total number of tutorials that we have available on our site. So on behalf of everyone at Digital Tutors, I'd like to say thank you for your support. We'll see you next time.